Alex Carter had always dreamed of owning a cabin. Not just any cabin, but one that felt like it belonged in a storybook. A cozy wooden retreat surrounded by towering trees, crisp mountain air, and the kind of peace you could only find far away from the noise of the city. For years, this dream stayed tucked away in his mind, something he'd think about when life got overwhelming or when he needed a little hope to keep going. But finally, after saving every penny he could spare and spending countless weekends researching properties online, Alex found it. The perfect cabin. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods of a small mountain town, known for its stunning views and quiet charm. It wasn't too big, just enough space for him to live comfortably, but it had everything Alex wanted. There was a stone fireplace, wide windows that let sunlight pour in during the day, and a porch where he could sit with a cup of coffee and watch the sun rise over the hills. The property even came with a tiny garden plot out back, perfect for growing flowers or vegetables. To Alex, it was paradise. He worked hard to make the purchase happen. Every extra shift at his job, every sacrifice he made, brought him closer to calling that cabin his own. When the papers were signed and the keys were finally in his hand, Alex felt a sense of accomplishment he'd never experienced before. This wasn't just a house. It was a fresh start, a place where he could escape the stress of everyday life and truly feel alive again. But there was one thing Alex hadn't fully considered when he bought the cabin, a detail buried in the fine print of the sale documents. The property was part of a community governed by a homeowners association, or HOA. At first glance, this didn't seem like a big deal. In fact, Alex thought it might even be a good thing. After all, an HOA usually meant well-maintained roads, shared amenities like parks or pools, and rules designed to keep the neighborhood looking nice. What could possibly go wrong? When Alex moved into the cabin, he received a warm welcome packet from the HOA. Inside, there was a glossy brochure featuring smiling families enjoying picnics and hiking trails, along with a long list of guidelines that residents were expected to follow. These included things like keeping lawns trimmed, parking cars in designated areas, and avoiding loud noises late at night. On paper, these rules sounded reasonable enough. Alex skimmed through them quickly, assuming they wouldn't affect him much since he planned to keep his cabin simple and low-key. He filed the packet away in a drawer and forgot about it almost immediately. For the first few months, everything went smoothly. Alex spent his weekends exploring nearby trails, reading books by the fire, and tinkering around the cabin. He painted the front door a cheerful shade of blue, hung flower baskets on the porch, and added personal touches that made the place feel uniquely his. Neighbors occasionally waved hello as they passed by, and Alex started to feel like he was part of a close-knit community. Life was good, or so he thought. What Alex didn't realize was that the HOA in his new neighborhood wasn't your typical group of rule followers. Over the years, it had gained a reputation for being unusually strict, enforcing rules with an iron fist and handing out fines for even the smallest infractions. Some homeowners joked that the HOA members acted more like dictators than neighbors, micromanaging everything from fence colors to mailbox styles. But because Alex hadn't been around long enough to hear these stories, he remained blissfully unaware of what was coming his way. As the seasons changed and autumn rolled in, Alex decided to add a few finishing touches to his cabin. One project he was particularly proud of was building a custom wooden mailbox. Using reclaimed wood from a local shop, he crafted a charming box that matched the rustic aesthetic of the cabin perfectly. It took him several days to complete, but the end result was worth it. The mailbox looked like it belonged there, blending seamlessly with the natural surroundings. Alex admired his work and felt a surge of pride knowing he'd created something unique and special. Little did he know, this seemingly harmless addition would soon become the source of a major headache. Unbeknownst to Alex, the HOA had very specific guidelines about mailboxes. They had to be a certain size, color, and material, none of which aligned with Alex's creative design. And while no one from the HOA had mentioned this rule when he moved in, it wouldn't be long before they noticed his non-compliant creation and decided to take action. At the time, though, Alex had no idea what was brewing behind the scenes. He continued to enjoy his peaceful life in the mountains, completely unaware that trouble was just around the corner. The cabin still felt like his sanctuary, a place where he could relax and forget about the outside world. But as the leaves began to fall and the air grew colder, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, and not necessarily for the better. It was a crisp autumn morning when Alex returned to his cabin after spending the weekend visiting friends in the city. The drive back had been long but peaceful, and he felt relieved to be home again. As he pulled into the driveway, something caught his eye. A plain white envelope taped neatly to the front door of his cabin. At first glance it looked innocent enough, maybe a flyer or a note from a neighbor. But as Alex stepped closer and peeled it off the wood, he noticed the official logo stamped in the corner. His stomach sank. This wasn't just any letter, it was from the HOA. Inside, the tone was firm and impersonal. The letter explained that Alex's mailbox was in violation of community guidelines and demanded payment of a $500 fine within 30 days. According to the HOA, the custom wooden mailbox Alex had built with such care didn't meet their strict design standards. It needed to be replaced immediately, or else additional penalties would apply. Alex stared at the paper in disbelief. A $500 fine for a mailbox? He flipped the page over, half expecting some kind of joke or misunderstanding, but there was nothing. Just cold black and white text spelling out the consequences if he failed to comply. He walked to the edge of his porch and looked at the mailbox, the same one he'd spent hours crafting, sanding, and staining until it matched his cabin perfectly. How could something so harmless cause such trouble? Frustrated but determined not to let this ruin his mood, Alex decided to address the issue head-on. He figured the best course of action was to simply replace the mailbox with one that met the HOA's requirements. After all, fighting the rule seemed pointless. What was $500 worth of stress compared to keeping the peace? So, the next day, he drove to the hardware store, picked out a plain metal mailbox in the approved style, and installed it. Problem solved, or so he thought. But just a few weeks later, another envelope appeared on his door. This time, the fine was even higher. $750. The reason? His flower garden, which he'd planted near the edge of his property, allegedly encroached on the communal pathway by 6 inches. 6 inches. Alex couldn't believe what he was reading. He paced back and forth on his porch, muttering under his breath. Who measured things this precisely? And why were they targeting him? The more Alex thought about it, the angrier he became. These fines weren't just inconvenient. They were absurd. His flower garden wasn't hurting anyone. It was just a small patch of daisies and marigolds he'd put in to brighten up the place. And the mailbox? That had been a labor of love, something he took pride in creating. Now, both were gone, replaced by generic, soulless alternatives. All because of rules he hadn't even known existed when he moved in. Determined to understand what was going on, Alex began digging deeper. He retrieved the welcome packet the HOA had given him months earlier and pored over the pages. Sure enough, buried among paragraphs of dense legalese were detailed regulations about everything from fence heights to paint colors. Some of the rules were reasonable, like prohibitions against loud music late at night. Others, however, bordered on ridiculous. One section specified that curtains must be hung at least 2 inches above windowsills. Another banned outdoor furniture that wasn't HOA approved. As Alex read through the document, a growing sense of unease settled over him. The HOA wasn't just enforcing basic standards of cleanliness or safety. They were micromanaging every aspect of residents' lives. Worse yet, they seemed to have unchecked power. There was no mention of an appeals process, no way for homeowners to challenge fines or voice concerns. It was clear now why people whispered about the HOA behind closed doors. They weren't just strict, they were authoritarian. Feeling increasingly trapped, Alex tried reaching out to the HOA board directly. He sent emails, made phone calls, and attended a meeting hoping to explain his side of the story. Surely, he reasoned, they'd see how unreasonable these fines were once they heard him out. But instead of finding understanding, Alex encountered resistance. The board members listened politely, at least they pretended to, but their responses were dismissive. Rules are rules, one member said flatly. If you don't like them, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for you. That comment stung. Alex had poured his heart and soul into making the cabin his home. Leaving wasn't an option, not after everything he'd sacrificed to get here. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being singled out. Other neighbors seemed to glide by without incident, while Alex kept getting hit with new violations. Was it because he was new to the area? Or was there something else going on? Desperate for answers, Alex turned to online forums and social media groups dedicated to HOA disputes. To his surprise, he discovered he wasn't alone. Dozens of homeowners across the country shared similar stories of frustration and helplessness. Many described the HOA as a mini-dictatorship, wielding its authority without accountability. Some had even been forced to sell their homes because of mounting fines and relentless pressure. One post in particular stood out to Alex. A woman recounted how her HOA fined her repeatedly for having a wind chime hanging on her porch, even though it produced almost no noise. When she refused to pay, they slapped a lien on her property, effectively freezing her ability to sell or refinance. Reading her story sent chills down Alex's spine. Could the same thing happen to him? If the fines kept coming, how long before he found himself drowning in debt? Despite the mounting anxiety, Alex refused to give up. He started researching legal options, reading articles about homeowner rights, and consulting resources provided by consumer advocacy groups. One article mentioned cease and desist letters, a formal way to demand someone stop unlawful behavior. While Alex wasn't sure if it applied to his situation, the idea intrigued him. Maybe there was a way to push back legally without escalating the conflict further. Then, inspiration struck. During a phone call with his sister, Alex casually mentioned his ongoing battle with the HOA. She listened sympathetically, offering words of encouragement. But when Alex mentioned the possibility of sending a cease and desist letter, she paused. "Wait a second," she said excitedly. "Didn't I tell you my boss works for the governor?" Alex froze. His brother-in-law, Mark, worked as a legislative aide for the state governor, an influential figure known for championing individual freedoms and standing up to corporate overreach. Could Mark somehow help? At the very least, maybe he could offer advice or point Alex in the right direction. Eager to explore the idea, Alex reached out to Mark that evening. After explaining the situation, he tentatively asked if the governor's office might consider issuing a symbolic statement condemning the HOA's practices. To Alex's astonishment, Mark didn't laugh or brush him off. Instead, he promised to look into it. A week later, Mark called back with incredible news. The governor had agreed to sign a strongly worded cease and desist letter aimed at the HOA. While the letter wouldn't have any legal binding power, its symbolic weight and the governor's signature would send a powerful message. For the first time in months, Alex felt a flicker of hope. Armed with this unexpected ally, he prepared to take his fight public and show the HOA that he wasn't backing down. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Alex knew one thing for sure. He was done letting others dictate how he lived in his own home. When Alex first heard that the governor had agreed to sign a cease and desist letter, he could hardly believe it. It felt like something out of a movie. A small-time homeowner taking on a powerful organization with the backing of one of the state's most influential figures. But as exciting as it was, Alex also knew this wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger than his mailbox or his flower garden. It was about standing up to an unfair system and showing others that they didn't have to stay silent. The next step was drafting the letter itself. With Mark's help, Alex worked closely with a team from the governor's office to craft a message that was both firm and respectful. The goal wasn't to start a war, but to make the HOA realize how their actions were affecting real people. The letter began by acknowledging the importance of maintaining community standards, something everyone could agree on, but quickly shifted to addressing the core issue: the HOA's excessive fines and overly restrictive rules. The residents of this community deserve fairness and transparency, the letter read in part. While guidelines are necessary for preserving order, they should not come at the expense of individual rights or financial stability. We urge the board to reconsider its current practices and engage in meaningful dialogue with homeowners to ensure a balanced approach moving forward. What made the letter truly impactful was the signature at the bottom. Beneath the governor's name was the official seal of the state, a symbol of authority that carried undeniable weight. Even though the document wasn't legally enforceable, its mere existence sent a clear message. Someone in power was paying attention. With the letter ready, Alex decided to deliver it personally. He wanted to see the looks on the HOA board members' faces when they realized what was happening. On the day of the monthly HOA meeting, Alex arrived early, clutching the envelope tightly in his hand. As he entered the room, he noticed a mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces seated around a long table. Some glanced at him curiously, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Alex took a deep breath and approached the front of the room. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside him. "I'd like to submit this for your consideration." He placed the envelope squarely in the center of the table, ensuring everyone could see the governor's seal gleaming. On the front, a hush fell over the room as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. One woman reached for the envelope and opened it, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. Within moments, copies of the letter were passed around, each person reading it with varying degrees of shock and discomfort. The reaction was immediate and electric. Whispers broke out across the room as attendees leaned in to discuss what they'd just read. Some looked outraged, while others seemed almost relieved, as if they'd been waiting for someone to challenge the status quo. For Alex, it was surreal to watch. He had gone from being an ordinary homeowner trying to keep his head down to becoming the center of attention in a heated debate about power and fairness. But the drama didn't stop there. News of the cease and desist letter spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, word had reached other homeowners in the community, many of whom had quietly endured similar frustrations with the HOA. At first, people were hesitant to speak up, unsure whether Alex's bold move would lead to consequences for everyone. But as more details emerged, curiosity turned into courage. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other before began exchanging stories, sharing their own experiences of unfair fines and unreasonable demands. One couple revealed they'd been fined $300 for painting their front door a shade of blue that wasn't on the approved color list. Another family confessed they'd received a citation for leaving a welcome mat outside their door, an item explicitly banned by the HOA's guidelines. Stories poured in from all corners of the neighborhood, each one highlighting a different aspect of the HOA's overreach. What started as a trickle soon became a flood, and it quickly became clear that Alex wasn't alone in feeling mistreated. The turning point came when local media caught wind of the story. Reporters love a good underdog tale, and Alex's battle against the HOA fit the bill perfectly. Within days, news outlets were calling him the Cabin Crusader, a nickname that stuck almost instantly. Cameras showed up at his cabin, capturing shots of the wooden mailbox he'd built and later replaced, and interviewing him on his porch. Alex found himself fielding questions about everything from property rights to the ethics of HOAs. Though he wasn't used to being in the spotlight, he handled it with grace, using the opportunity to shed light on the broader issues at play. "I'm not trying to burn the system down," Alex told one reporter during an interview. "I just want fairness. I think most people here feel the same way. We're not asking for chaos, we're asking for balance." His words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking conversations far beyond the confines of his mountain town. Social media lit up with posts supporting Alex, with hashtags like "Ya Fairho Rules" and "Ya Stand with Alex" trending locally. People shared memes poking fun at overly strict HOAs, while others posted heartfelt messages thanking Alex for having the courage to stand up when so many others had stayed silent. Meanwhile, the pressure on the HOA board continued to mount. Facing public scrutiny for the first time, they scrambled to respond. Initially, their defense was predictable. They claimed their rules were designed to protect property values and maintain a cohesive aesthetic throughout the community. But as the criticism grew louder, cracks began to show. Anonymous sources within the HOA leaked internal documents revealing discrepancies in how fines were issued. Some homeowners appeared to receive warnings or leniency, while others, like Alex, faced steep penalties without explanation. This revelation only fueled the growing backlash. Residents demanded answers, organizing informal meetings to discuss potential solutions. For the first time in years, the community came together, not to argue over trivial matters like mailbox colors or lawn lengths, but to advocate for change. Inspired by Alex's example, a group of homeowners formed a resident advisory committee aimed at holding the HOA accountable and ensuring greater transparency in decision-making. Despite the mounting tension, Alex remained focused on his original goal, finding a resolution that worked for everyone. He understood that dismantling the HOA entirely wasn't realistic. It served a purpose after all, but he also knew reforms were desperately needed. So, when the HOA announced plans to hold a special meeting to address residents' concerns, Alex saw it as a chance to turn the tide. In the weeks leading up to the meeting, he collaborated with neighbors to compile a list of proposed changes. These included capping fines at reasonable amounts, establishing a formal appeals process, and requiring the HOA to provide written explanations for all violations. They also suggested creating a resident liaison position to bridge the gap between homeowners and the board. Armed with these ideas, Alex prepared to present them to the HOA and hopefully pave the way for lasting improvements. Looking back, Alex couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed since that first fine arrived on his door. What started as a personal struggle had evolved into a movement, uniting an entire community around a shared cause. And though the outcome of the upcoming meeting remained uncertain, Alex felt hopeful. He had already accomplished something remarkable, proving that even the smallest acts of defiance could inspire others to demand better. Whatever happened next, he knew he'd given his neighbors a voice, and that was worth every ounce of effort. The day of the special HOA meeting arrived, and Alex woke up early, his mind racing with anticipation. This wasn't just another routine gathering. It was a pivotal moment for the entire community. The room where the meeting would take place was usually reserved for small, quiet discussions about landscaping rules or holiday decorations. But today, it felt like the center of a storm. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood, and nearly every resident showed up, filling the space to capacity. Some brought folding chairs from home, while others stood along the walls, eager to hear what would happen next. As Alex entered the room, he could feel the energy in the air. It was a mix of excitement, frustration, and nervousness. People whispered to each other, sharing stories and speculating about how the HOA board would respond. For once, the usual divide between neighbors seemed to vanish. There were no cliques or awkward silences, just a united front of homeowners ready to demand change. Alex took a seat near the front, clutching his notes tightly in his hands. He had spent hours preparing for this moment, rehearsing what he planned to say and anticipating possible objections from the board. When the meeting began, the HOA president, a stern-looking man named Mr. Grayson, called the room to order. His tone was clipped and professional, but there was an undercurrent of unease in his voice. Clearly, he hadn't expected such a large turnout, or the level of scrutiny that came with it. After a brief introduction, he opened the floor for comments, inviting residents to share their concerns. At first, only a few brave souls spoke up. One woman recounted how she'd been fined $200 for leaving her recycling bin out overnight. Another man described the stress of receiving multiple violations within a single week, all for minor infractions like having a garden hose visible on his porch. Each story added fuel to the growing fire of discontent, and soon more people joined in. Voices rose as emotions ran high, and the room buzzed with intensity. Some attendees held up signs they'd made, listing demands like fair fines and stop micromanaging our lives. Alex waited patiently for his turn, listening intently as others shared their experiences. When his name was finally called, he stood up slowly, drawing a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you for letting me address the group," he began, his voice calm but firm. I'm here not just as someone who's been fined unfairly, but as your neighbor. Like many of you, I love this community. I chose to live here because of its beauty and potential. But over the past few months, I've seen how these rules have caused unnecessary hardship for so many of us. He paused, scanning the room to make eye contact with as many people as possible. We're not asking for chaos or disorder. We're asking for fairness. These fines aren't just numbers, they affect real lives. They create fear and resentment instead of fostering a sense of belonging. That's why we've come together to propose some changes. With that, Alex launched into his presentation, outlining the key reforms the Residents Advisory Committee had drafted. He started with the most pressing issue: capping fines at reasonable amounts. No one should have to pay hundreds of dollars for something as trivial as a mailbox or a flower garden, he said, gesturing toward the wooden box he'd rebuilt, and proudly displayed again after replacing it with the generic metal one. Let's set limits that reflect common sense, not punishment. Next, he addressed the need for transparency. Every violation should come with a written explanation, he continued. Homeowners deserve to know exactly what rule they've broken and why it matters. And if someone disagrees with a fine, there needs to be a clear appeals process, not just silence or dismissal. Finally, Alex proposed the creation of a resident liaison position. This person would act as a bridge between the HOA and the community, he explained. They'd help resolve disputes, answer questions, and ensure everyone feels heard. It's a simple step, but it could make a world of difference. By the time Alex finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Neighbors nodded in agreement, some even cheering loudly. It was a powerful moment, one that reminded everyone present of their shared humanity and desire for justice. Even members of the HOA board looked visibly shaken, exchanging uneasy glances as they realized the depth of dissatisfaction among residents. Mr. Grayson tried to regain control of the meeting, attempting to defend the HOA's practices. Our goal has always been to maintain property values and uphold community standards, he insisted. But his words fell flat. Every justification he offered was met with murmurs of disbelief or outright disagreement. One homeowner interrupted him mid-sentence, saying, "Standards are important, but so is compassion. You can't put a price tag on kindness." The turning point came when a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Bennett stood up. She had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else and commanded respect simply by being herself. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but her message was clear. "I've watched this HOA grow stricter and colder over the years," she said. "And I've stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause trouble. But seeing Alex stand up and seeing all of you here today has shown me that silence isn't the answer. We deserve better. Our community deserves better." Her words struck a chord with everyone in the room, including the HOA board. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to acknowledge the validity of the residents' complaints. By the end of the meeting, they agreed to review the proposed changes and promised to implement reforms within the next month. While it wasn't an immediate victory, it was progress. And for now, that was enough. In the days following the meeting, the momentum continued to build. Local newspapers covered the event extensively, praising the residents for their unity and determination. Online forums lit up with messages of support, not just from neighboring communities but from people across the country who had faced similar struggles with their own HOAs. Alex became a symbol of hope for anyone feeling powerless against authority. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the shift within the neighborhood itself. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now greeted each other warmly, forming bonds that extended beyond shared grievances. Community events popped up spontaneously: potluck dinners, outdoor movie nights, even volunteer cleanup projects. The sense of isolation that had lingered for so long began to fade, replaced by a spirit of collaboration and mutual support. For Alex, the transformation was both rewarding and humbling. He had never set out to become a leader or a public figure. He simply wanted to protect his home and live peacefully. Yet, in standing up for himself, he had inspired others to do the same. As he sat on his porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, he reflected on everything that had happened. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in months, Alex felt truly at peace, not just with his cabin, but with the community he now called home. The weeks following the special HOA meeting brought a wave of change that no one in the neighborhood had anticipated. True to their word, the HOA board convened multiple closed-door sessions to review the residents' proposals and address the growing concerns. While some members of the board were reluctant to admit fault or relinquish control, the overwhelming pressure from both inside and outside the community left them with little choice. Slowly but surely, reforms began to take shape. One of the first changes was the implementation of a cap on fines. Gone were the days when homeowners could be slapped with $500 penalties for minor infractions like mismatched curtains or slightly overgrown lawns. The new policy limited fines to a maximum of $50 per violation, with clear guidelines on how violations would be assessed and enforced. This alone was a huge relief for residents who had been living in fear of unexpected financial burdens. Transparency became another cornerstone of the updated rules. Every violation now required a written explanation, detailing exactly what rule had been broken and why it mattered. Homeowners were also given the opportunity to appeal fines through a formal process, ensuring they wouldn't be left in the dark or dismissed without recourse. For many, this simple step restored a sense of fairness and accountability that had long been missing. Perhaps the most significant reform was the creation of the resident liaison position, a role designed to bridge the gap between the HOA board and the community. After much discussion, the position was filled by Mrs. Bennett, the retired schoolteacher, whose impassioned speech at the meeting had inspired so many. Her calm demeanor, combined with her deep understanding of the neighborhood's history, made her the perfect candidate for the job. Within weeks, she established regular office hours where residents could drop by to ask questions, voice concerns, or seek clarification on HOA policies. She also organized monthly town hall-style meetings, giving everyone a platform to share ideas and feedback. These changes didn't happen overnight, and there were moments of tension along the way. Some board members resisted the reforms, arguing that loosening restrictions would lead to chaos. Others worried about setting a precedent that might weaken the HOA's authority. But as the months passed, even the skeptics began to see the benefits. Complaints dropped significantly, and the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted from one of resentment to cooperation. Neighbors started working together on projects like beautifying shared spaces, organizing seasonal events, and supporting each other during tough times. For Alex, the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. His cabin, once the epicenter of conflict, became a symbol of resilience and hope. Visitors often stopped by to admire the charming wooden mailbox he'd rebuilt, now officially grandfathered into compliance thanks to a revised design policy, and to hear his story. Alex didn't mind sharing. In fact, he found joy in recounting the journey, especially when it inspired others to stand up for themselves. But the fight against the HOA wasn't just about winning. It was about leaving a legacy. Alex knew that real change required more than just temporary fixes. It needed ongoing effort and vigilance to ensure the HOA remained accountable and responsive to the needs of its residents. With that in mind, he helped establish the Resident Advisory Committee as a permanent fixture within the community. Comprised of volunteers from diverse backgrounds, the committee served as a watchdog group, monitoring the HOA's actions and advocating for transparency and fairness. The impact of these efforts extended far beyond Alex's immediate neighborhood. Local media outlets continued to cover the story, highlighting the reforms as a model for other communities struggling with similar issues. Across the state, frustrated, homeowners reached out to Alex and his neighbors for advice on how to navigate disputes with their own HOAs. In response, Alex collaborated with advocacy groups to create a toolkit for challenging unfair practices, complete with templates for cease and desist letters and tips for organizing grassroots movements. What had started as a personal battle had evolved into something much larger, a movement for justice and empowerment. Despite the progress, Alex understood that perfection was unattainable. No system is flawless, and disagreements would inevitably arise in the future. But what mattered most was the foundation they had built, a framework for open communication, mutual respect, and collective problem-solving. By fostering a culture of collaboration, Alex and his neighbors had transformed their community into something stronger and more resilient than before. On quiet evenings, Alex would sit on his porch, sipping coffee and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The mountains still looked the same, their peaks outlined against the fading light. But everything else felt different. The air seemed lighter, freer, as if the weight of years of frustration had finally lifted. He thought back to the day he first arrived at the cabin full of excitement and optimism, only to find himself caught in a web of rules and fines. Now, looking around at the thriving neighborhood he had helped shape, he realized how much he had grown, not just as a homeowner, but as a person. Alex's victory wasn't just about reclaiming his peace of mind. It was about proving that even the smallest acts of courage can spark meaningful change. When he looked at his wooden mailbox, the same one that had started it all, he smiled, knowing it represented more than just craftsmanship. It stood for determination, unity, and the power of standing up for what's right. And every time someone asked him about the infamous mailbox incident, Alex would laugh and say, "It's not just a mailbox, it's a reminder that sometimes you have to fight for your place in the world."